I want to go ahead and promote the next in our product chat series. That one is coming up Tuesday, October 26th, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We've always got something in the works that's designed to give you actionable takeaways. And here is yet another one. On October 26th, we're going to be joined by Lindsay Hunt, Director of Product at TaskRabbit. And we're going to be talking about how to retain customers, build loyalty, and increase revenue opportunities. Who doesn't want to do all those things? But we're going to learn how they did it at TaskRabbit with Lindsay Hunt. So join us for that one on October 26th. And with the business out of the way, it is time to get to the fun part and introduce today's guest. It's a 2-for-1. We get two. The first one, usually sitting in this seat, not literally, this is my house. That would be weird, but usually sitting in the host seat, Rebecca Kalogeris. Let's do the bio. We never read your whole bio. Let's see what we got here. VP of Marketing and Product Management at Pragmatic Institute. Rebecca is a proven marketing executive and turnaround specialist. She's made a career of building up world-class, results-focused marketing departments. I know that because I'm in one. Prior to Pragmatic, Rebecca held marketing leadership roles at a variety of software and service companies, including Tririga, Shift4 Corporation, Client Development Services, and EcomLink. Rebecca, it is wonderful to have you here today, and I'm not just saying that because you're my boss.
Thanks, Eddie.
Number two guest. Ian Templin is an experienced educator, content creator, and product professional driven by a belief that learning never stops and that we learn best when we learn from each other. He takes pride in bringing his 20 years in the physical and digital learning space back to the place that established his approach to the product craft. As the director of product management for Pragmatic's product vertical, he and his team of instructional designers create and refine purposeful, inspiring, and parentheses, you guessed it, end parentheses, pragmatic learning experiences that meet the needs of the best audience in the world. Y'all. I changed the last word from you because it was folksy, Ian.
Beautiful improvement.
Glad to have you guys today. Hey, we've got an exciting topic. It's one that we wait for every year, and the time has finally arrived. The Pragmatic Institute Annual Survey results are in, and they are beautifully formatted, as we're going to look today, to make them accessible and usable to our audience. And we're going to dive into a little nitty-gritty today and learn about some of the things that it teaches us about the past year. Before I hand you the reins, I should mention that to our audience, yes, every single one of you will get a link to the PDF of the survey that we're going to be walking through today, and we're going to save that till the Q&A. Right before the Q&A, we'll post the link so everybody can pop it open and look at all the pretty pictures, and hopefully they'll still listen to us while they're engaging in the wonderful content. But let's get into it, guys. Teach us about the new stuff we learned this year in the annual survey.
Awesome. Thank you, Eddie. All right. So this is one of my favorite times of the year. We've got over 60 pages of great content in this year's survey, so it's meaty. We're going to walk you through some of the highlights, and we're super excited to have you all. So we had, I think the first thing is like how many people. One of the things about our annual survey that's always so exciting is the reach of it, right? So we had thousands of respondents who responded to this year's survey and completed it. Hundreds who agreed to do further interviews, which gave us some really great context as well. And we were not, unfortunately, able to interview all of them, although it is on Ian's to-do list. But it's part of that passion and part of that response that we just so love to see, and why truly Ian and I have two of the greatest jobs in the world. To get to do product with product people for product is just fantastic. So those thousands of people, what did they look like? So we had 58% were male, 41% female, 1% non-binary. I'm glad we updated that question. I think that was really smart. It was about time for us, a little late maybe. that is a higher percentage of female responses than we have gotten in previous years, which was nice to see, which gives us some good data when we look down at the salary information that we'll get into as well. A pretty strong geographic coverage, so heavily in US, Canada, and the Americas, but also great responses from Europe and Asia. In addition to what you see here in terms of the states, my current home state and my former home state, there was about 12 other states that also responded to the survey, but the number of responses were too small for us to be able to show and not screw up the math. So, so just so you know, people from Maine and Nevada, you were seen and you were heard, and you were included in this. So a really good diverse look at that. Also, I want to tell you guys, it's a pop-up because we're going through the survey, and I also have like 6 windows of data open for when you have questions. So if I look anytime like I'm looking through different monitors, that's why. And another thing, because Ian and I are the keepers of data, when we go through items, if there are things later that you're like, man, I would really like a cut of that just for this segment or this piece, that is absolutely something we can do. We will, of course, anonymize the data so you don't know who responded, but definitely reach out to. Okay, so experience, right? So I think there are a couple of things here to highlight. I don't think I'm at the page I thought I was going to be, but that's okay. One of the things that we will touch on here is that there was one of the big changes in the annual survey for this year is average years in the role. Pretty consistently in previous years, and this is my 10th year doing the survey. It's our 20th, but my 10th. It's been about 2 to 2.5 is the average tenure we're seeing in a product role. Responses this year were about 3.25. And I think this is very much reflective of people's desire during COVID not to proactively move. Many of our peers unfortunately lost their jobs, but if they didn't, there was a desire to just sort of like, let's just keep camp. I do think that this is very much a sign that the product profession will be part of this migration, sort of employment migration that we're hearing about. I think we'll see pretty significant amount in the product space because there is a bit of this pent up demand, and because so many of the tech companies we've worked with have sort of stopped the geographic restraints. So I think that also gives us some freedom to go through. So that was a big change in that.
I think, Rebecca, just to jump in there, I think we're also going to see a little later on a couple of additional stats that will bolster that. There are places for us to go. What does the job situation look like going forward?
Yeah. And another thing that's in here that we won't touch upon in this one, but I encourage you guys to go to, is the path to product. Because that's really interesting. There are so many different ways people come to the product space. I think it was 32% came from tech roles, 21% came from sales, and then there was a lot of analyst stuff too. So there's what are they doing in their current role and how they got there. That I think is good to dig into. If we can, yes.
Rebecca, I have a clarifying question that's going to kind of set the stage a little bit from someone. What was the time frame of the survey, just so we know when all of these answers are coming from?
Ooh, great question. So that was end of last year, beginning of this year, is when the quantitative data, the majority of it. We had 2 follow-up surveys that went off on 2 topics that came out, I believe, Ian, that was end of Q1 that those came out. Mm-hmm. And then interviews that we used for some of the contextual information occurred throughout up sort of January through May. Good question. And if we could pop to 32. Nope, not 32. Oh, we added slides.
Yeah, we added some slides. What are you looking to see?
That's a great question. All my notes says show me 32.
That's why it's pop-up, friends.
Yes. Industry size, industries and products. I think it might be the next one. There we go. Just to give you an idea of the base, and I think this is important as you're all looking at the data and being like, hey, does that represent me? So just a look at the type of companies that respondents were working at. So we do have a strong B2B market reach. So you'll see that 80% of respondents said that they were primarily B2B, 12% said it was about 50-50, and 8%, obviously, that's how math works, did B2C. I don't think that means that that's how overall product managers are laid out in the world. Ian and I have had this conversation. I do, but that is where our market tends to be and where our reach tends to be. So again, if you're a B2C person listening, go, that's so unfair. Let us know and we can cut the data specifically for you guys. But you can see that there. Type of product offered, again, very, I think, reflective of where we are. So you see these, they have primarily software is 80%, though often they also have either professional services or SaaS offerings. But the primary revenue point, if they were only allowed to pick one, it's about 50% that's software. And the rest is split off there. And then you can see the revenue size of the organizations over there on the left kind of fit where we're in. Industry is another place. I think it's difficult if I were to ask anyone on the call right now to say what industry they are from. I think it's a struggle to say, oh, I'm in tech, or do I talk about the industry my products serve? But you can kind of see some of that spot there on industry and why there's so many others, is I think that that is just a difficult question for people to get real clarity on there. So that's the kind of overview of who's in the response. Thousands of people made up from these type of individuals who serve these type of companies, right? Usually, and you'll see where we wait to tell the salary information to the end, because that's, let's be fair, we all are very curious about that. But we're going to pop right in. We're going to talk a little bit about salaries today. There's a lot more data available, but let's talk a little bit about it. So one is salaries by location. And this is, I mean, there are very clear lines here based on both the country you are from, and there's lots of people from lots of different places that they're introducing themselves in the chat. And I saw someone from France, and we do have some French respondents, but it's not a lot, which is why they're not called out here. So you can see here how it breaks down between countries. One interesting piece is that there was a fairly large swing in Australia in terms of salary data. But that seemed to be more of an anomaly by the smaller number of responses. But it did look like either that, or in Australia, they are just starting to make a lot more money in product. But, and another thing for those of you who have gotten our annual survey several times over the years, one of the things you may notice is there is a kind of significant bump in averages across the board, sort of like as a blanket statement. And when we first looked at that data, we spent a lot of time looking at that data because it was, you know, the middle of COVID, and you think, really, there's a big bump in salaries. But we actually changed slightly the way we asked the question in order to get more precision in the answers. So when we looked at that, and, you know, we do have several data instructors and data teams. So that was really nice to have some expertise who can help make sure we're doing it right. That bump is more of a change of the way we ask to get more precise numbers than a signal of any large lifts across department or across the industry, which is also something that we'd followed up in our qualitative pieces. But this gives us more precise data, and this is the way we will calculate going forward. So it's sort of like a one-time correction. Oh, that is a really good question about what will we do when people go remote? I love that. Maybe we'll even ask where they are and where their company is based. That's a great question. Okay, so you can see the geographic spots there. Let's flip over to talk about education. And, you know, we ask what level of education they have, and we do see the max, sort of the biggest compensation is for those with a master's degree. We have a sizable amount who have a PhD or are working towards it that didn't have the same bump. But I know Ian spent some time thinking about this particular area, Ian, and I don't know if you want to pop in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an interesting, you know, whenever we're looking to solve problems in the market, we have to weigh our ROI. Is it worth that? So when you see a big number like that, 15K if I have my master's, well, that seems like a no-brainer. Let me go get the bump. But according to educationaldata.org, the average cost of a master's is around $66,000 in the US. So you know, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons there of whether or not that's something you want to do to get that bump. Similarly, for a doctorate, you're looking at closer to 114,000. So that bonus is definitely excellent, but it's certainly something you're going to want to weigh as you're looking at that. Now, those numbers are really looking at four-year institutions and full terms. You know, things like MBAs and smaller programs are going to get you there faster, but it's definitely interesting to see how you balance out the education you're earning with your earnings in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I noticed I think it's a really good point in the sort of time return. And they're asking you to repeat that data source again, Ian.
Educationaldata.org.
Awesome. All right. Lots of people are asking like, hey, is this everybody? What level of spots? And we do have a little bit of breakout in there. We have more information that we'll be trickling and releasing later. At a high level, I would say that I think it's 60% of the survey respondents or individual contributors, just around 65%. And the rest were either a team lead or sort of a department head spot. We can definitely break down salaries by those pieces. That's good. One interesting thing in terms of experience, when I looked at the data, you have a steady grow in your career until between 12 and 15 years experience. And that's sort of the peak growth rate. It's not necessarily the peak earnings, but you see that after that, like whether you had 12 years experience or 17 years experience, did not have nearly the effect on your compensation that the growth rates did before. Great question on gender. And I spent a lot of time looking at the gender gap. The gender gap is something we see consistently. We saw it, there's some good news and there's some, it's hard news every day to see that it's not even, right? But the gap is more pronounced as you go years of experience and for higher level roles. So the gap between salaries for women with 12 years experience versus men with 12 years experience is larger than women with 2 and men with 2, which I do believe is a signal that we're evening out the hiring process, right? So that we're starting it at a more even spot, but it is definitely evidence of something that we've seen in a lot of different studies, that it is nearly impossible in your career to make up a gap that started at the beginning, right? That it because everything grows like this, you don't ever get up to that same level. So for those trying to enter product, it is really good to prepare yourself. And we've done some podcasts on this and how to negotiate your first salary. It's not going to be $140,000, right? It's your first as a starting role, but you need to get that, because if we're not getting sort of parity in the beginning, it just becomes exponentially harder. And we have looked at this across education experiences, trying to even it out. So it's the same level of experience, same level of education. And what does that gap look like? But again, the gap is bigger sort of at the end of the career than at the beginning. So I am hopeful that means there is progress in this area.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as we look at our 2019 survey, we see that same 13% gap. So I agree that very first step of getting yourself on the level playing field is hugely important.
Yeah. And I also would say in some of the things, particularly when we're talking about bonuses, which are not giants in this field, for the bonuses that we recorded, they were averaging between 6 and 8%. Roughly, I think it was 5% of their salary, which is not nothing, but they're not necessarily huge numbers. But what was mostly looked at for those was they were judged on overall product sales, NPS scores, and launch and release dates. So thinking about that as what the organizations are comping specifically for with bonuses is a good way of also thinking about what you should make sure you're both focused on and talking about your impact on, because those are ones clearly tied specifically to value for organizations. Okay. All right. And then one other area on here just to point out as our little segue to the next section is the responsibility. And this is interesting. We have definitely seen this shift over the last 5 years, that those, we're going to use product management and product marketing because titles are a mess. But when we say product management, I'm going to mean primary focus is deciding what should go in the product and working with development teams. When I say product marketing, I'm going to mean primary focus is go to market, how to make those products fly off the shelf. And your primary partners then are going to be marketing, communications generally, and sales. And what we've seen is in the last 5 years, the role of product marketing has increased in compensation and comparative to product management. And that's a pretty significant increase that we've seen over the years. It had been flipped. And we're going to dig a little bit more into that and why the role of product marketing which is very near and dear to my heart, has been rising both in compensation, but also in sort of its strategic role within an organization. Sometimes it's because product management is becoming more technical, and some of those strategic activities are moving into product marketing. In some cases, it's other ways. But so how we did this, how we looked at product marketing, we've gotten a ton of research, we've done a ton of surveys in this spot. We do a lot of Nahito visits, as you might think. But one thing we did was look at product marketing in high growth organizations as it compares to product marketing in low growth, no growth, or down, right? Sort of in those organizations that are seeing high level growth, what does it look like there? What we generally see that is sort of a signal of what's coming, right? It's not a perfect way, but in the organizations where this is working really well, what does it look like? So here you can just see some comparisons between, master's degrees within that population versus the general population of product marketing. So that's how you should read that. And there's not necessarily huge differences. I think probably the biggest one, two things to point out is it's not necessarily, again, length in profession, but also the number of products. That was probably the biggest thing. For the most part, product marketing works on about twice as many products as product management. And there's about a 2-to-1 ratio there. But in higher growth ones, they've made it a smaller. So instead of 12 products, they're working at 8, so 50% less, a little bit more focused. So I think that's one thing just to think about how it's structured. If we flip to the next one. Also ratios, right? So in high growth organizations, how do those ratios compare? And one of the things you'll see here is the salespeople ratio, which feels very high, right? For every one product marketing person working on sales enablement to support salespeople, there are 23 salespeople hoping they'll get on a call with them or do something for them. Actually, that number, that ratio is significantly less than we see in the general population, where that number may be more closer to 1 to 48. So again, a little bit, it's a stronger investment in this area. One just side note that I think is interesting is that most often product marketing is within marketing. Second place it might be in is in product management. It is rarely considered its own department. And I think it'll be really interesting to see if that evolves as it has on the product management side. So on the product management side, the majority now are within their own department. That's a big change, right? 20 years ago, they were mostly in marketing. We've seen them come into engineering. We've seen them go in ops, but now they're mostly their own department. It'll be interesting to see as product marketing has grown and as becomes kind of a bigger player, will it also be a separate department or it will continue to be within another? Okay, so this slide has a lot of stuff on it, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing to see, but a couple of things of note is we looked a lot at where they were primarily spending their time, and in high growth organizations versus non-growth organizations. And a few things that I think were really important. There are 4 areas where they spent like 10 points higher than in non-high growth companies. So the most strategic product marketers, what are they focused on? They're adding understanding customer buyers, buyer personas, thought leadership, and interestingly enough, defining user personas, right? So a real focus on persona understanding and journey understanding and that sort of strategic buyer and marketing perspective.
And that defining user persona stat was very interesting. You normally see that in the product management realm as they're thinking about how the product itself works. So that shift, I totally agree with you, is I think a larger understanding of the entire journey, not just to point of purchase, but also beyond and into use, which is a fascinating shift in that particular role.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this too, Ian, and I was wondering how much of this was potentially the SaaS product rise, right? Where when you're thinking about product marketing and their role in retention, and that just a bigger focus on user personas that we might have in a SaaS. That's just a hypothesis. Nobody quote me on that one.
Absolutely could be, as well as size of company, right? What is that first product person you hire, and what are the kind of the many shoes that they fill could also be a factor of that.
Yes. And another one, which is fairly small, but it's grown a lot, is pricing and packaging. I think particularly, and I think this is still an opportunity for product marketers out here watching, and actually product management, there is more opportunity for us to influence particularly packaging, and the power that can have on revenue is pretty big. And my last point on product marketing, though, as Ian knows, I can talk about it for quite some time, is this kind of shift on this bottom right piece. So this is, again, the amount of hours they're spending per month on different activities. And when we look at the overall product marketing population versus, again, in these high growth, the biggest thing is there's a real shift from my primary responsibility is to support marketing communications, right? To provide the personas and campaign briefs and think about leads. To, in these higher growth ones, my primary focus is sales enablement, right? That's where they're spending their time and where they're focused. It's really, how do I build the right tools? It doesn't, and none of these are, hey, I'm on a sales call, right? That's not it. It's how am I focused on empowering sales, providing the right tools, ensuring alignment there. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons we see a rise in the compensation and a rise in the strategic, right? Because that is a really direct play on revenue and results, right? When there's that combination there. So I think that's a signal of things to come. And again, something for product marketers looking to have a big piece. Don't forget that sales enablement part. Make that really understand your sales team, their goals, and where they're headed. Okay, so much good stuff on product marketing, but they're not the only partners, right? Product marketing is working with product management, product marketing is working with marketing, and they're working with sales. But Ian, who else? Who else are we playing with?
You know, a very powerful trio that we need to talk about is that connection of product, the product team, as well as your data and design teams. You know, we're seeing that the companies that are saying that they are most innovative are the ones that have figured out how to make this trio work well together. And you can see kind of right from the get-go, right? When data is coming in and coming out, you're being able to make very rational decisions about what you should be working on. When you have design and product working together, design is so good at that, reaching out and making human-centered decisions. When you can connect that with the problem space that the product is finding, you can make really powerful products and you can monitor how they're doing once they're out into the world. That connection of collaboration between product and design was one area of focus for us. It's clearly on the minds of our product managers, especially 90% of them have some visual interface, right? Whether that's an actual UI or whether that's a reporting engine or something like that. And 44% of them are actively collaborating with a design resource. And that's either a design resource within an engineering team or a separated design team that they're able to use at need. Another 38% are in that feedback loop. So there's definitely high touch points happening, especially between product and design, but those touch points have led to some friction. And that's where I think we're working out. You know, product management has spent a long time figuring out how to work with engineering teams and how do we have a good back and forth where I bring you the why, we work on the what, and you design the how. We're relearning that same language when we're working with our design teams. And that raises some points of friction and things to work through. 15% are having challenges moving from the what to the how. There's a misalignment in what the customer really needs. And some of that can come from who's going to the interviews and having the conversations. Are you sharing a common language? And then we are seeing some role disparities, people figuring out what is my responsibility and what is yours. You know, we still have product managers that are creating their own wireframes, driving their own user testing. And that's happening both with product managers that have design teams and those that don't. So there's definitely a chance for a greater collaboration in that design world where you know, we can make more powerful human-centered decisions. In the data world, says the guy who's also driving at the same time, so his transitions are much less smooth. The data world is really interesting, and where I think it differs from design a bit is that there's a very one-to-one connection of product to design. In data, we start to look at it from that corporate level as well. And there's really a feeling from many of our respondents that they're starting to fall behind. You know, it's really, you can't swing a stick without running across a new article about AI-driven products or ML learning iterations. And it's easy to feel like everyone knows something that you don't. And we see that reflected in the data where 40% of our respondents feel like their competitors are ahead of them in the big data world. You know, how are we using those advanced AIs to do work? Only 25% of them say that big data has actually affected them and their role to date. But it goes out from the corporate down to the individual level. There's really clearly a draw to be data driven. And even as people feel that they are, they're also feeling like there's more that they could do. So do you need to be data driven? 90%, over 90% of our respondents felt like if you're in the product space, this is either going to be an important differentiator or it's going to be mandatory to be hired. You need to show that you know how to use data to make decisions and to drive your roadmaps forward. 92% of our respondents felt like they were data driven in their approach to their work. They had that confidence, but at the same time, they acknowledged that there were other things that they needed to be working on. And what's really interesting here is that some of the things that they felt most confident about were also the things they wished that they could do better. So from our respondents, you know, we had asked in a separate data survey, where were you feeling most successful in using your data? And they said, number one, prioritizing what's next. Number two, determining if a problem's worth solving. When we gave them the same list and asked, what do you wish that you could be more successful doing? The number two answer, determining if a problem's worth solving. The number three answer, prioritizing what's next. So even as we're using our data to drive our decisions, we still feel like there's a place that we could do more. To here. So how is that data getting used? And where are we finding the most value? Where is it most beneficial? Those of you that are Pragmatic alumni are familiar with our framework, and a kind of a really cool way we reached out to find out more about where do you see that data-driven approach being most beneficial. And this survey went out to both product managers and marketers, executive and sales. We had a really wide set of respondents. And you can see very clearly there's an upper left, a very strategic focus on understanding what the next thing is to solve, on making sure that we're positioning it correctly, that we're giving it the right price. And you see down there in product roadmap that we are prioritizing the next right thing using a data-driven approach. And so you can see that there in the center column, market problems being number one, roadmap and pricing following soon after. I'm going to pause there because I'm just zipping through. Rebecca, were there things in this kind of data realm that really spoke to you?
No, I mean, I think you covered a lot of the main points. I found it, as you said, really interesting that they both probably used data the most in the same areas where they wanted to use data better, right? Mm-hmm. Those little hot spots on the framework. And I do call out to you, Ian, love the hot spots on the framework. I liked that question. You were able to pick which ones.
And it was interesting to see the varying roles. And I agree with you, roles and titles can be very confusing. But you know, when we pared this data down to just executives, well, 3 hotspots, right, on market problems, product roadmap, business plan. That's what they are very focused in on. Is my company building the right thing? Are we positioning correctly? Are we building the next right thing first? When we opened it up to product marketing, we saw actually kind of a real spread all across the upper area of the framework and then down. So they're really focused from strategy to tactical, which speaks to what Rebecca was talking about, where the entire pipeline and that whole journey is something that they're aware of. When you add product management in, that's where you start to see that kind of hot area under planning there, under requirements and use scenarios. How do I use the data to make sure that the thing that I'm building has the right features to it, is solving the right problems? And how do I use that data to talk to my teams and make sure that they understand what it is we're working on? I also don't want to leave this section without talking to the portion there on the left, where one of the areas where we can feel uncertain in data is when we try to bring that data to our discussions, especially with our leadership. When we feel like we've collected the right data and we bring that to our discussions about road mapping and prioritization, 10% feel that even though they have that data, they're failing to convince their stakeholders. So I think a really interesting place for us to be looking going forward is, what does that failure look like? Is it that there's not a agreed upon stable understanding of what that data means? Is it the way that we visualize? Do we maybe overwhelm with graphs and charts rather than a simpler approach? So there's a lot more to understand there. In addition to your leadership, there's also your data team. How do you work with the data team? So very similar, as we reached out and got an understanding, about 50% of the respondents we had to our data survey either had a data team that they could go work with, or they had a data person within their teams. There's still something to be worked out there in terms of making sure, how am I using the product principles that I have learned and use that with my data team, so I'm getting back the responses that I'm hoping to. There's still language barriers there that need to get worked out, but it will be very exciting when we do, because there's clearly a need in the data space. I don't think that we could stop and hear from anybody else here if we don't talk about COVID. So I think we need to jump over to that section. You're going to see a lot of survey data about COVID from many different places. I think we've already kind of mentioned the Great Migration. We've mentioned the move to being working from home and in person. I think you're going to find that in a lot of places, but we're pragmatic. So what we wanted to focus on was, how did that pandemic affect our ability to deliver value to customers? How did it affect the product team? And where were the people that weathered it? What did they do well? And what did other folks that didn't weather it as well, what did they miss out on? So some really interesting data in here. And I keep switching between data and data just to make sure that everybody's happy when I say that word. How well did our January product roadmaps and plans hold up? And that's focused on January of 2020. So as we were going into the 2020 year, we were feeling pretty good. And then we hit March. And obviously for a lot of people, things changed. We're seeing there that 70% of folks felt that their roadmaps held up from what they had planned in January to where they got through the rest of the year. But 25%, a quarter of people felt that they had to completely rework their roadmap. They had to toss what they had and do something new. And you can see there in the upper left, where did those changes really come from? Rebecca, is there anything in that little area there in terms of where did those shifts occur that really spoke to you?
I think the target market is it's big, right? I mean, emergence of new target markets or changing your target markets, that's about as big as it gets. It's not a small little shift to make, and the ability to be agile enough to make that in a short term, I think, is one of the places where we've seen the big difference on how well people weathered this storm.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you sort of broke out a little earlier, the kind of areas of concern for product management and product marketing, I think we see that in those top four, that it's not just about who my target market is and what they want, or what our priority was for our key features that now need to be shifted, but also how do we reach our customers? How many people here on this call were signed up for conferences that then didn't happen? And that was your plan for getting either new customers or reaching out to the customers you have and making touch points when they come by the booth. That had to be shifted, and we had to figure out new ways. I would imagine it'd be interesting to dive deeper and to see how many social platforms started to pick up, maybe that had been on the roadmap to work on, but now got accelerated. The last thing that I'll put down there in the bottom right-hand corner, you are not alone. Did it feel like you were suddenly having more meetings than you had ever had before? A 30% increase in time spent in weekly meetings versus the last time that we had done our survey. We've talked, Rebecca and I, quite a bit about this. It's just fascinating to see so many people ended up working from home. And the question is, even as the roadmaps were holding up, 70% holding up, did the expectation and clarity around what people were doing day to day, how did that get affected? And so did meetings have to come up as a way to kind of take the place of the swinging by the desk and saying, hey, what are you working on? How's it going? And it will be interesting to see in the years to come, both how many people remain working from home, and also do we sort of shift our expectation around what does it mean to be an engaged and active employee? Does it necessarily mean hours spent at screen and availability, or does that shift? That's going to be, I think, really fascinating to see the workplace change over time. Really interesting on terms of the kind of going back out to the macro and what happens to organizations. We heard about how product marketing has shifted in high growth. Well, what happened to those companies that were going into 2020 feeling like high growth companies? 7% of them by the end of the year felt they were no longer in that category. And you see that commensurate rise in low growth. Folks that came in as low growth, that number came higher as we went through the year. Similarly, medium growth dropping down and flat and negative moving up. So I think not a surprise there. That I think that's an expected coming out of the pandemic. But what's interesting is its effect kind of internally on our department growth and where we see the future. And this is something we alluded to a little earlier on, that the size of departments did shrink over the course of 2020 from now to January 2020. And as Rebecca had mentioned, unfortunately, some of our colleagues out here in the product world did lose their jobs, but there is hope on the horizon, right? The good news is that 52% of our respondents said that they have openings. Nearly 20% was 5 or more. So as Rebecca had mentioned in the beginning, the folks that retained their jobs stayed in their jobs. Now there's a lot of room for expansion. There's a lot of room to find that next step outside of where you are today. So I think that there's hope. It's always tough to know, are we through it? Are we at the end? So these statistics will be interesting over the next couple of years to see, what happens as we get into 22 and 23. We did ask, what's going to happen once we go back to normal? And again, it's tough to know what normal is, but what do we think is going to stick around? And what did we hope was going to stick around? So Rebecca had mentioned that change in the target market demand was so huge. 41% of our respondents feel like that's not going to change. The need of their market has shifted, and it's going to remain shifted, at least in the near term. Similarly, key features that felt important pre-pandemic maybe not come back as important again once we come out the other side. It may be that because of that target market change, the things that felt most important to build are not the same. We see sort of a kind of a similar 1 through 6 as we saw in terms of what we felt changed into what we think is going to stick around. What was interesting is we asked, what do you hope sticks around? What do you want to remain when we get out into the new world? And unsurprisingly, right, the emergence of new target markets. If I have the ability to find a new place to sell, whether that's with an existing product or a new product, I hope that sticks around and I have a chance to sell out there. I do want to mention a couple of our, where did people do well and where did we maybe have some misses? For those companies that really did well, there's several pages here. I'm going to focus on just a couple of them so that you saw this very early on in the pandemic, the opening up and saying our product is now going to be free to use, at least in the beginning, some extended months or years into that. But there was gain and success seen in landing new customers and securing your current customers by understanding that their needs were shifting and their ability to pay was shifting, and being open to taking that free model and then transferring them over into paid customers. And we see there in the missed opportunities that the folks that didn't do that held on, some of them felt like they had missed out on the ability to gain some market share. Similarly, you can't do it all yourself, right? If you have the chance to partner, especially if you see that market shift and you know somebody that's in that space or close to that space, then you can do a quick pivot and partner. And now you're both in that market together. You could remain successful as long as you weren't going it alone. And we see in the missed opportunities that the work from home, right? Maybe early on in the pandemic, you remember, are we just here for a week? Are we here for a month? How long are we staying at home? And some folks maybe didn't jump as quickly as they could have. I'll finally mention that ruthless prioritization. It's always important. It's always something that we tell you should do. but definitely in that time of crisis, you've got to make sure that you're focused on the most important thing. We saw that again as you look at the target market shift and your ability to target new markets. If you can refocus what's important and you can commit to that thing, you can get big dividends. Rebecca, I've just gone on at lightning speed, and I know that we're getting towards our end here, but I want to make sure that you have a chance to add any commentary.
No, I think you did great. And I have to say, I had fought Ian in putting COVID questions in. I was just like, more COVID questions, but I really like the questions we added. And I really think, as you point out, Ian, it's a distinctive look at COVID's effect on products and the roadmaps that I think was really interesting as we dived in. I'm gonna go a little rogue for just a second because there are many questions about the salary as it relates to the year's experience, and I will tell you that answer is not in the PDF you will get. I don't know what we should have put it in there. It is not in there, and so I am going to steal the screen and I'm going to share you, and it's ugly. But I will show you the data. So I'm going rogue, I'm going crazy here. But I think it's a very good question, and we will also remedy how to get that out into the world. But so we talked about overall the general average salaries. This isn't going to give everyone exactly the answers you were looking for because this is of all of the respondents. So it is not divided out product management versus product marketing. It is not divided out by, am I an individual contributor, not simply by years experience in the product space. And so you can kind of, it doesn't give you by region, but at least you can kind of see the overall growth patterns. Some exceptions, again, with the exceptions, it's raw data. So it could be number of respondents. It could be what part of the world they're in, but you can at least get a little bit of extra data there about years experience and average salary. And this is average salary and average bonus combined. So in this particular graph, it is pooled compensation. So that was my sneaky, completely off book, rogue share of data to give a little bit more there. So you can screenshot that if y'all want.
That was fun. While you've got that up, Rebecca, do we have any further breakdown by education? I say there's one in there asking about a master's. And then the other one was, are we asking about net or gross, or is this just all total compensation?
Yeah, so this would be gross. This is just, it asks for it in US dollars, annual salary, and then annual bonus. And this is those two combined.
Oh, and you reminded me, even when we were talking about Canada, we're talking about US dollars, right?
Yes. All of it is
there was another
in
question on the salary.
There is always the question, well, we put it in US dollars. I can't guarantee the respondents did the conversion. So I'm always a little, I try to make it big and bold that it should be in US dollars, but whether or not they did that, or if they put it in Canadian dollars or pounds, there isn't really a way for me to check. I don't know what it says on. I think there was one on here, but I don't know what it's going to look like when I click on it. So there you go. We're really going rogue. Right. So this, yes, average base, average bonus by compensation level. And again, this is total combined. So there you go. The secret. Now everyone's judging. Everyone is judging our Excel spreadsheets right now.
No,
Ian,
I'm glad you did that, because you're right. We had tons of questions coming in specifically about the compensation section. No surprise there. That is a major concern for everyone. So I'm glad you broke that down.
Yeah, and we will remedy that both on the year's experience and the seniority of the job level. So am I an individual contributor, a team leader, or I think it's individual contributor, department head, or executive, so that you'll have those. So everybody also saw, yes, everybody also is enjoying my pip. Boy, I can't like if there's 0 responses, it gives you the div 0. Yeah, Kyle, feel my pain. All right, that's it. I'm my only rogue.
Ian, did you have another section, or shall we continue on with our Q&A? Because we got buzz in the Q&A panel over here today.
Oh, Q&A all day.
Let's do it. Oh, you know what we should do? I think they've waited long enough. I think it is time to share out the link to the PDF of the annual survey, so folks can open this up on their own and peruse it to their heart's content. We're going to go ahead and stick that in the chat. There it is. I see it with my own eyes. Hopefully, folks will still pay attention to anything we say now that they have all these beautiful graphics in front of their face. They're going to be just diving in. But while you guys open that and look at it, go ahead and post any last remaining questions that you may have in the Q&A panel. We've got bunches of them, and we don't want to take up your whole day. So I'm going to try and pick and choose the ones that will apply to the most people. But let's see what we got. Oh, we need to do one more thing as well. We're going to put in a link to a quick poll as you're thinking up your final questions. This just helps us to know what kind of information we need to give you. We're doing our market research here, right? So answer the poll for us real quick if you could, to give us some feedback on the info in the webinar for today. Thank you very much. Good clickers. And then let's jump to some of these questions if we can get it. I know that we may run a little long because there's so many questions and so much good content. Just know that we will send a link out to all the respondents today with a recording. So if you got to jump off to another meeting, adieu, we'll miss you, but you'll get to watch the end of it when it comes to you in the link. But with that said, let me jump into some of the.
We're having a few people who are saying they're not seeing the link. It's hard with the chat. It just kind of, you have to keep scrolling up, but you should be able to download the PDF.
Scroll up. It is sent to everyone. I see it, and it appears as a download link. That is.
Does that work on those who are doing Zoom via web browser?
If they're in Zoom, we'll the web browser, the participant chats won't show up, but we can send everybody a link to the survey when we send them a link to the recording. So all respondents will get it either way.
And Kelly also printed a link, which may work because it's not a download. So hopefully that will work.
Yeah, there we go. So you got two methods of downloading if you have access to the chat bar today. All right, questions. Oh, just give us a little more info on the demographics of the respondents. Can you tell us anything more about how many people responded? I don't know if we covered that exactly. Education levels and any other details you have about who they were and what types of folks.
So the survey that you have now has going to give you education levels, industries, types of companies they work at, gender, age, all of those stuff's in there. In terms of number of responses, for the salary portion of the survey, we had just about 1,100 responses, which is a lot of the information in there. We did two other surveys that were subsequent to that on different topics in there, and I think we had about 500 and 300 responses to those. So just about 2,000 in total. If you look at the salary data, it's just about, I think, 1,100, or I think it's just around 1,100, which is why on some of those cuts, numbers can seem weird, right? 1,100 is a lot, and it's a lot more than most surveys this size. But every once in a while, if I'm trying to cut, department heads with 20 years experience in Australia, and I have one, that can be pretty tricky.
Good.
Anything you would add, Ian?
Ian agrees.
Or you just want to say that's what I was going to say?
Yeah, exactly. This is a trope for Rebecca and I. Let me say that's what I was going to say. Exactly.
Here's an interesting one. Chris asked this. Any insight into why product marketers are shifting focus to enablement? Personally, I'm seeing more turnover in sales and less capable digital sellers, and was curious if that's a common theme during enablement requirements. How come?
Ooh, that is a great question. And I would never stand and say that I think, it's not making up a shortcoming in sales, or we have great sales partners. But I do think that for lots of digital products in particular, and again, with the focus on SaaS and other products where retention is so big, the balance has, I think, shifted a little bit into marketing as an ongoing relationship focus. We all have lots of good sales partners still, but I think some of the different products and types have shifted some of that focus, but I'd be interested in Ian's thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I also wonder if that speaks to that more strategic role that a product marketer is playing. Are they moving up a level in terms of working with sales the individual enablement pieces, right? This is not about collateral creation, but about working together to understand the goals and the metrics that the business has. And is that helping to drive some of that connection and that feeling of enablement, where it's not necessarily piece of paper enablement, but understanding what our success metrics mean enablement?
Good. Yeah. Here's a cool one from Mindley, who asks, what is the definition of a high growth company versus other companies? How did we define that?
Ian?
You know what? I'm going to defer to you on that one.
Oh, no.
So hard. All right. This is what I have to put up with. So actually, Ian had asked the same question. He's like, well, what makes it high growth? And fair. It is self-reported as high growth, low growth. I'm looking right now. I'm stalling. I'm tap dancing to see if the definition was in the question as it was asked, or if it was a poorly designed question, probably by Ian. No, it probably wasn't. That said that left it up to interpretation. Holding. So it's going to take me a minute. So
here, Ian, I'm going to toss you a question while she's looking for that. I know Rebecca mentioned at the top that there was a few responses from France, but a few people are asking if you have the information to share about Europe and France, even if it might be limited.
I mean, we probably can find a way to pull that together. Absolutely. You know, as Rebecca had mentioned, we want to make sure that what we're providing is as statistically significant as we can. So we did kind of set a bar in terms of, if we didn't get enough responses to something, we didn't put it into the survey because we didn't feel as comfortable saying that was indicative of the larger area. But yeah, I don't think there's any problem with sharing the individual pieces to those who want it.
Right. Good.
And just it was, I don't know, again, you get to see me mess up in real time, but yeah, we just asked, would you describe your company's current growth trajectory as high growth, medium growth, low growth, or other? So.
Absolutely must have been a question I designed, something better to fix in the future.
I think it was the same question I did before. So it was me. That one was me. And yeah, again, we've got lots of data. We will definitely take questions on this. I would 100% have you reach out to Ian or myself, particularly Ian, with nice. Specific questions and cuts, and we'll be more than happy to give you information if we've got enough to make it valuable.
We've got a few minutes left and we're coming up on an hour. I'm gonna do two more questions. Can we do that? The first one is, do you have advice for how to make the shift from product manager to product marketing manager?
Come to the cool side.
What's the difference? And then how does a person shift from one to the other? That's not necessarily a survey question, but simply following the trend, I think.
So, I mean, I do think in the survey that you got, the PDF, you'll see there's like a two-page spreads that talk about where responsibilities lie in general that we see in product management through product marketing. So take a look at those when you're thinking about what each of those different roles, because again, titles are a mess. What is the responsibilities and functions that are driving these? If you look at those, if you were to want to transition from product management to product marketing, that's a great question. Do you want to take the first answer, Ian, or do you want me to take the first answer?
Please.
So he can say that's what I'd say. Great. No. So that is a really good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities on both sides, right? It's about understanding the market and the problems they have. There is, I think, on the product marketing side, it is a heavier focus on the buyer problems, as well as the user problems like we talked about with some of the SaaS products and stuff, but really understanding buyers and the buyer journey and doing the research there, which will also help your current product management work. And then it really is looking at sales, right? So often product management, your number one partner is development. And here I would start talking to your sales team. I would start doing win-loss, which we're seeing not done enough in general. Again, these kind of things will help your current role and start to build the muscle and understanding that you would need to make that transition into product marketing. And of course, you should take our market and launch courses. I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Right?
She She caught me there at the end, but yeah, I would also say that you're going to see very high overlap. That's why we say very often that roles and titles are a mess. It's really about responsibilities that you have. And I would say going from having been in product management all of my career, thinking about what product marketing is sort of just a little further direction in both sides, right? How do I get a little earlier in the journey, and how do I follow them a little later in the journey and assist people in understanding the value that we bring, right? We are very good at how do we find problems and create value as product managers, as product marketers. How do you flip that around and say, this is the value, this is why this matters to you, this is what's important to you. And you can probably already articulate that, which means you're on the path.
And Mark in the chat gave a good answer too, right? Positioning is a big thing. Launch, which is it's a huge part of that role.
Good, Mark. Thanks. Well, there we are. I'm going to ask you one more question. You know, we like to wrap these discussions up, usually by asking our guests, what are 2 things you would have our audience do differently based on, we call this the RK question.
I know, it's my own question used against me.
That's why we call it that. But I'll tell you, we'll make it easier on you because we got 2 of you. We'll ask one of each of you. So each of you, what is one thing you would have our audience do differently based on the information that we just presented to them? I'm going to flip a coin. Rebecca, go.
Okay. If you were to do different, if you want to get ahead, there is an area that this survey year over year shows we are not doing enough, and it's so fundamental to our job. You got to talk to your market, right? 69% are spending 0% of the time talking to potentials. 66% are spending 0% of the time doing win-loss. Do those things. It will make a difference to your current product and your current spot, but man, will it make a difference to your career.
Bingo.
Excellent answer.
Ian?
Yeah, I would say, don't just, when you go back, consider your role. Think of yourself as, how can you advocate across your company? And that's, am I an advocate for a more structured data understanding? Am I an advocate to reach out to my design team if I'm not already doing so? Am I an advocate for my sales and understanding what they need? And as you saw very specifically there, am I an advocate for my female coworkers? Am I trying to help to bridge those gaps that we're seeing? Where can I bring advocacy based on the data that I'm seeing about where our companies are? And how can I be not just a person at a company, but an advocate for the people around me?
Beautiful. We had so many good questions that we did not get to today. We mentioned a couple times that folks are free to reach out to us. Where can they do that?
So if you do experts at pragmaticinstitute.com, Ian and I will both get it, and we'll make sure it gets answered. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of those others. So
yeah, same.
Wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
Man, well, folks, to wrap it up, if you have not yet utilized the Pragmatic Alumni Community, the PAC, as the cool kids call it, there will surely be discussion about today's topic in the PAC. So go check that out. You're going to find those discussions. You're going to find a library of resources. You're going to find more exclusive events for PAC members. And go check all of that out at pragmaticinstitute.com/PAC, P-A-C. And with that, Ian and Rebecca, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for letting me take your hosting chair for the day, Rebecca. And good job responding to those gotcha questions. I think I did not get you. You got
did
them all.
not.
Folks, have a great rest of your week, and we will see you again October 26th for Lindsay Hunt. And until then, au revoir. See ya.